Hello, everyone. My name is Jack Trethui, and I am the Outreach Coordinator for the IMechE Yorkshire Humber Process Industries Division. This webinar is called Engineering Graduates for Industry, the Student's Perspective, and it's the second webinar in the series. And the first one can be found on the IMechE's YouTube channel. Our speakers for today are Megan Naylor and Dan Habershaw. They're here to share with you their experience of the skills gap found in their time at university. Megan has experience across a variety of internship roles in the defence aerospace industry, and she's currently finishing her master's at the University of Sheffield and completing a dissertation project supported by BAE Systems. Alongside academic studies, she is passionate about outreach and promoting opportunities within engineering. Dan is an MEng Aerospace Engineering graduate, graduating from the University of Sheffield in 2020. He was a part of the Sheffield Engineering Leadership Academy, due to start a project management graduate scheme with Faithful and Gould in September 2021. Daniel also has experience in motorsport and manufacturing. After their presentation, we will open up to our panelists, Shannon Lee, who is a senior lecturer within the Department of Mechanical Engineering, and Hoda Amel, who is a senior research engineer at the National Centre for Additive Manufacturing. All the presenters are here to discuss your thoughts on the skills gap and what can be done to tackle it. So please do feel free to submit as many questions as you like at any point throughout this webinar. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Dan and Megan.
Thank you, Jack. I'll start sharing our presentation now. So here we go. So yes, thank you for that, Jack. So engineering graduates for industry, the student's perspective. And we're just sort of going to give, me and Meg are going to give you our experiences of what we think the skills gap is, and where we think we can address it within the education system. And we'll start with that now.
So thanks so much, Jack and Dan. So for those of you who watched the first presentation, as Jack mentioned, Dr. Gary Woods kind of addressed the concept of the skills gap within engineering. And some of the facts that he shared included the fact that 59% of companies interviewed in an IET report in 2019 reported that graduates have academic knowledge, but inadequate workplace skills. So this is obviously a huge issue and something that Dan and myself really recognise. And most poignantly, I think you can kind of see that there's a huge contrast between the very black and white engineering skills that we're taught in an academic setting, and then the more kind of grey area skills, the creativity, the judgment-based skills that you really need to apply that academic knowledge actually in the workplace. So when thinking about kind of what is the skills gap, that's the perspective that we're really coming from. And when thinking about what the causes of the skills gap are, when we were discussing it, Dan and myself both settled on the same idea really, and that was the fact that we both had the exact same favourite module during our university course. And this was the Aerospace Group Design Project, which was a third year module that we did, which revolved around interdisciplinary teams. We'll talk a bit more about it later, but basically we were tasked with designing and building an unmanned aerial vehicle, or a UAV, completely from scratch. And so this was a really practical module that gave us the chance to build our budget management, resource management, and also just general people and project management skills. And it was all of these really practical and authentic aspects that made this our favourite module, really. When we were discussing the preparation for this presentation, we were kind of thinking back on that module and thinking it's crazy that we were so blown away by that module and its authenticity and the chance that it gave us to apply our skills, when in reality every module should be like that to a degree, and it shouldn't be so far out of the norm that we have these opportunities to really apply our skills. So that's where we felt like this skills gap really came from. And last time, Gary suggested some approaches for tackling this challenge, including a focus on enterprise education, development of agency in students, and strengthening and expanding work experience opportunities. So here we are today to speak from a student perspective and give our views on potential solutions to this issue.
Yeah, so in order for us to address the skills gap, we first had to sort of understand what skills industry thinks that students are missing. And through sort of looking at various papers, various websites, one of the things, these are the skills that kept cropping up time after time. So they are critical thinking, communication, leadership, teamworking, adaptability, and interpersonal skills. And as Megan said, looking back on our time at university, these skills aren't really embedded in your sort of cut and dry modules that you get 6 of each semester. And these skills are only really developed in special modules like the UAV project mentioned earlier. And that's a real problem. These are the skills that industry is saying that engineers are missing, and we're not addressing that within the curriculum on a wide scale. And that's something that we think can be addressed by integrating more of the integrative projects within the curriculum. So integrative projects, me and Megan were both lucky enough to be part of the Sheffield Engineering Leadership Academy, which is a co-curricular academy that runs alongside your degree and has 2 integrative projects that are a year long, running along your second year of university and your third year of university. And they also run alongside skills workshops and industry speakers who come in and share their experiences. And this was the best way we found that we learnt these skills that are missing from industry. So our first year as part of Seller, our project was to deliver a piece of public engagement to promote STEM to young people, linking engineering with the national curriculum by creating an interactive arts installation and augmented reality museum installation. And we managed to do that, and we reached around 12,000 people. 2,500 of those were local Sheffield school children, and the majority of them then reported that they had a new understanding of what engineers do. And we were the first undergraduate installation by invitation to the Festival of the Mind City Festival in Sheffield, and we reached around 7,000 people there. So it was a fantastic event that we were able to do ourselves and build and be a part of. And then in the second year of Seller, there's a more technical project that's designed to use the skills you've learned in year 1 in a more industry-focused context. And there are multiple examples of success in this throughout the years of Seller. My project in second year was to increase the uptake of the Internet of Things technology within the healthcare sector. And that culminated in being able to present at a international conference in Bologna for assistive technologies. And that was an amazing experience, and one that I gained lots of skills from that you don't normally get within university context. Being able to go abroad and present your work to industry experts was an amazing experience. And Megan also had a really good experience with that second year project as well.
Yeah, so our project was also Internet of Things focused, but it was from more of an environmental sensing perspective. So I'll talk about it a bit again later, but we partnered with the Urban Flows Observatory, which is part of a national network of urban sensing technologies. And we kind of followed on from the outreach theme of the first year project and developed a more technically focused outreach program that we ended up taking into local secondary schools. And kind of similar with Dan, we got the opportunity to present our research and our ideas at a national conference, which was for the UK Collaboratorium of Research into Infrastructure and Design. And that was a really great opportunity as well. Another really good chance to develop our confidence, presentation skills, and all these aspects that you just wouldn't cover generally in the university curriculum. So that was fantastic too.
So as me and Meg were talking, we sort of identified 4 key factors for success within these integrative projects to bring these skills out to the fore. And number 1 was an open-ended brief. So by having an open-ended brief, the students are able to create your own vision and your own objectives through collaboration and inspiration from the start of the project. And that meant that the goals that you set are truly yours, and you take ownership of them. And you can carry those throughout the duration of the project. And you establish the scope of the project. And that means that you get to have experience in managing expectations, handling difficult conversations, sort of encouraging people, sort of bringing people back in their expectations in a real context. And unlike standard group project-based modules, our ambition to achieve our goals was measured by the success of the project. There was no mark scheme or anything like that. So we knew that if we delivered a good event, we were going to satisfy the seller success criteria and also our own motivations. So you didn't have to worry about meeting a mark scheme, changing what you wanted to do. You could decide and you could push that project forward. And the motivation in the team was high throughout all of these because we chose what we wanted to deliver. And we found there was fewer problems in team dynamics that would arise from conflicting academic aims of team members. Everyone was in this together and everyone was pushing towards the same goal.
Yeah, so it's a really interesting point that Dan raises about team dynamics. And I think as the group lead for our second year project, that was something that I really recognised that was a brand new challenge in sort of having to balance the, I guess, motivations of the team. And like Dan said, because it's such a broad brief, I mean, our brief was literally just to produce something that would promote Internet of Things in an urban sensing environment to anyone. So we got to choose our target audience, we got to choose the method by which we would kind of interact with those students, all these different points that we had to all align on. So a team of 6 people who all have very different interests and experiences. Managing that from a lead perspective was a really new skill that I just wouldn't have got in a curriculum environment. And it gives you the confidence really to then take that into an industrial setting. As Jack mentioned at the start, I've been lucky enough to do placements throughout my degree. So I've done summer placements and then a 12-month industrial placement between my 3rd and my 4th year of my degree as well. And these were all skills that I really took into the workplace. So an example being that we actually got a challenge set to us as a group of interns to redesign the work experience programme that the company would put out to national students, really. And that was another experience of this where it was a very open-ended brief. But because of my seller experience, I had the skills to manage team dynamics and come to a compromise that everyone was happy with and that would actually achieve our end goal rather than a set of very strict criteria.
Thank you, Meg. So the second point that we identified was authenticity. So the projects need to be real or authentic as possible. The projects we worked on Seller were beyond authentic because we delivered real products with real outputs to real people, real businesses. And the motivation in our team was strong due to the passion for delivering our defined goals. And the project was always a priority despite any other academic pressures because we had real accountability. Having real stakeholders and customers who depended on you ensured that we couldn't lose focus of what we needed to work on. When you've promised someone something, sat down with them face to face, and they've invested in you, you have no choice but to deliver. And that's a very different stress from an academic point of view, where it's only your grade that matters to you, really. And overall, the genuine nature of the project connected our learning to the applications it can be used in. So the skills workshops we were running alongside the project, we were then able to use those skills in a real environment. And even without consciously knowing, you use the skills that you've learned in the workshops and you really hone them and you really make them your own. And it gave us time to practice and recognize the value of our newly developed skills within that professional environment. And this can't be effectively recreated in a simulated environment. You can't pretend to have a conversation with a stakeholder. You can't pretend to have a conversation with an actor and it gives the same feel. It has to be real. And I think that's the difference between a module or an integrated project when you get those real environments to hone your skills in.
Definitely. And I think that going back to the example of our Urban Observatories project, we not only partnered with the Urban Flows Observatory, but through engaging with the local physical network of engineering and STEM-minded people within Sheffield, we actually came across an organisation called the David and Jane Richards Family Foundation as well. And their focus is to empower and inspire children through technology, the use of computing, and all these sorts of similar goals really that we had with our project. So those two organisations aligned really nicely for our project. we were able to kind of bring them on board as another key stakeholder. So this not only developed our skills with stakeholder engagement generally, but also that really proactive approach of going out and finding someone else you could partner with. And it was actually through their existing partnerships with local schools that we managed to end up presenting our project then in a local school, and talking to Key Stage 3 students through a series of kind of workshops and lessons, and engaging with them and empowering them over the influence that engineering could have in their local environment from an urban observatory's perspective. So this was a really key aspect of authenticity really in our project, was the fact that we had these organisations depending on us. We had the professionalism aspect of setting up meetings and meeting the deadlines that they set us, and also making sure that we were achieving what would actually match the expectations of all these other external organisations as well. So that's something, again, like Dan said, that really can't be achieved through an internal module unless you're going to partner with external organisations.
Definitely. And then the third point that we identified was trust and empowerment. And I think this is a key one for me as well. That we felt empowered through being trusted to make our own decisions. We took ownership of the project. We could hold and manage real resources that aren't just pretend bits of money on a paper, or that you get in a module. You're told you have a budget, and you have to sort of work around it. We had a real budget and we had to really stick to it. And we had to buy real things, and that was you felt very trusted to be take ownership of all that. And we also had to represent Cella externally. So we had to go to professional events. We had to go and be a representative of Cella and the university as a whole. And you get sort of your professional mannerisms can be built in meetings and things that you have to attend. And it's important because it inspires confidence by putting the learning you've done through the skills workshops into practice, so that you can realize the vision that you've created as a team. And that's a massive thing of being ready for industry. If you go into industry and it's your first ever meeting, you're going to be nervous. You're not going to know how to handle yourself. Whereas if you've managed to do this throughout these projects, then you can feel confident sitting around a table and raising your opinion, because you know that people are going to listen to you. I had this when we were going to our outreach event. I was invited to be a part of the steering board, and I was sat around with CEOs of multi-million-pound companies, and they were listening to my opinion. And as a student, I was like, whoa, is this how it's supposed to be? I thought I was just a token student on this board, but they actually listen to you. They actually take your opinions on board. And that was something that was really empowering, and meant that I then had the confidence to go and take that into other meetings and really put my stamp on things. And I think that's something that's missing with graduates going into industry.
Totally. And again, offering my industrial experience through my placements, during my year in industry, I had loads of roles that I felt comfortable putting myself forwards for, that were very customer facing. And it's that same idea of, whereas during university, I was representing the university and Cella, when I was then in the company, I felt really comfortable taking on a role of being a kind of customer-facing figure that would represent the company professionally. And that's an element of confidence that I think you can only really get through knowing that you've delivered these projects in the past, you've managed these stakeholders, and you've had that experience to rely on. And not only that, but technical confidence is something that I think you can be very shaky with when you're first going into industry. And I know that going into an office full of people who are years more senior and have years more experience than you can be a really frightening experience really for graduates. But it's empowering them with that sort of experience and that confidence that really comes from these projects. And that's the only way that you can get graduates to really deliver their full potential, is through having that confidence.
Definitely, 100%. And then the fourth key aspect was the respect of failure. So throughout all these projects that we've discussed, failure was a real possibility. Because they were real projects, you could just end up not presenting anything at the end. You couldn't, if you didn't put the work in, it could not get done. However, because Cella is such a good environment, it supports you. That was never going to be allowed to happen. So failure is a real possibility, but that support that you get means that you're not going to catastrophically fail and let down the people who have real stakes in your project. However, because there is that supportive environment, you can then take a few more risks, and the non-catastrophic failures that can occur throughout any, well, and will occur throughout any project, nothing's going to go as smoothly as you think it will. You can learn from that, and you can then take those risks, learn from the mistakes, and move forward and end up with a better project by the end. And we learned from non-catastrophic failures throughout our time, definitely. One example that springs to mind was we went over budget on our Theatre of Engineering project. And I'd been working with a company that had done all the marketing for us quite closely for a few months, and they were on the steering board of the event as well. And we got a bill through from them that had charges on that I thought was quite unfair. There were a few discrepancies, and it pushed us over budget. So I was tasked with going to have these conversations with these people to try and get these costs cut. Little did I know that Gary, who's the head of seller, had told us that our budget was slightly less than what it actually was. So we had the budget to cover those costs, and we weren't going to get bailiffs coming knocking on the door. But he didn't tell me that. So I had to go and have a very, very difficult conversation with someone who I considered to be a friend at that point. But when I got to the coffee shop where we would meet before, it was a very different environment. There was a binder full of reasons why I had to pay everything. The friendly sort of attitude was gone. It was a professional one. There was two of them. There wasn't just the one person who I thought I was going to meet. And that situation was such a shock for me. And it's still something I look back on now. In interviews, I talk about it. Whenever I'm having difficult conversations, I pull from that experience. And again, like we've said multiple times, you can't simulate that environment. You can't simulate that pressure, that sinking feeling of, oh my God, I've got to deal with this here. And that's something for me that really, really built my skills and built my confidence within those situations. And I did get a little bit of the money knocked off, not all of it, but a little bit. So yeah, I was quite proud of that.
Yeah, I think it's totally true. Those difficult conversations and the difficult situations that you can be put in these projects when you end up in industry isn't something that you're really taught how to deal with. And you almost can't teach someone how to deal with that until they're actually in that situation. And when we were putting this presentation together, another key thing that I wanted to note at this point was it's not only the failure that's been caused through some decision that you've made or some way that your team's kind of action things. One key point at the moment is the failure that widespread is being experienced as a result of COVID-19. And going back to the work experience example, during my placement when I had to organise the company's work experience kind of programme that happens each year, it's a 2-week residential course for students between the ages of 16 and 18 to come on. And it's supposed to introduce them to engineering, to the company, and to other opportunities within defence and aerospace. And as I said, we were tasked with completely redoing this experience. So we had to rewrite the project work that the students would be doing. We had to revisit the budget and look at ways that we could cut down on it through the residential experience. So it was a huge amount of work that had gone into this. And then midway through the year, when COVID-19 really started kicking off in earnest, that was when we found out that we wouldn't be able to go ahead with the project. So that year, the residential course was cancelled, and all these students that we'd already interviewed and selected, we actually had to write to them all and tell them that they weren't going to be able to have this in-person experience. So that was a failure that we could never have really planned for. But drawing on my experience with Seller and the outreach experience that I already had in creating these learning resources that could then be used remotely, this was something that I was able to harness. So I not only had the experience to draw all this information that we created for the physical work experience together, I could then put this into a remote resource that we ended up actually releasing so that those students who were supposed to be on this course could access it still. And lots of other students nationally and internationally as well that maybe wouldn't have been able to physically attend the course. So it also addressed that accessibility aspect, which is something that's so important as well with engineering experiences. And this was something that I would not have had the skills or the confidence to be able to do. And interestingly enough, when I was thinking about this to put this presentation together, I thought back to what the theme of that work experience was, and it was about the future engineer. So it was looking at all these skills and how students can prepare themselves from really early on in their careers to then go into industry at the end and be really successful engineers themselves. And a lot of those messages are echoed through this presentation today, which I think is really interesting as well.
So obviously me and Meg have been very, very lucky that we were part of Seller, and we've had these experiences, and Meg within industry as well. And there are a few instances that when I look back on my time at university, these integrative projects are sort of in there and the skills are in there. But there are very few and far between. But as Meg already mentioned, the aerospace group design project, where we had to design, build, and attempt to fly a UAV from scratch, that was an integrative project. You had the skills of learning the theory beforehand. You had the modules that were running alongside that, where you were learning about flight, you were learning about building aircraft. But then you also had to physically put together a UAV, physically design it. You were in a small team of 5 or 6, and every team's UAV was completely different. And you all got to make it your own. You all took ownership of your little part. You were interdisciplinary. Although we were all aerospace engineers, you had people focusing on the electronics, you had people focusing on the propulsion, you had people focusing on the aerodynamics of it. And you came together as a little team. And there were experiences throughout that project that echo what we've spoke about throughout the rest of the presentation. And there are problems that arise that you can't foresee. And that's a massive thing with adaptability, is thinking on your feet, right? How can we solve this? How can we change this? And when you're not having a real output, and it's sort of a lot of modules, they try and simulate this by you get into little teams, you have a pretend project to do, and then halfway through, they'll come in and say something's happened, something's changed, and then all of the work you've done, you have to rearrange. And it's the best way of trying to simulate it. But those problems are always thought up by someone who's designed the module. They're always thought up by someone to throw a spanner in the works. And they never feel genuine. They never feel real. Whereas when you've got something physical in front of you and it falls to bits, or you're ready to fly a UAV and you accidentally shear the end of your motor off, which is what happened to our group, there's no way of simulating what you do in that situation, how you act and how you react. So I think this is just another example of an integrative project that really shows that these skills can be learned throughout the curriculum. And talking to Meg, talking to my other friends on the aerospace degree, this is a lot of people's favourite module. And I don't think that's by accident. I think that this module is something that the University of Sheffield and other unis could build on, and could really, really help bridge that gap. And there was another one that was the industrial training program, where we partnered with a defence company in industry, and they set us real challenges that they were working on. And they said, right, if you can go and solve this problem, go, have a go. And we were in little teams of, again, interdisciplinary within aerospace. And it was another module that, because you were working on a real project, you were working with a real industry partner, you had a contact within that industry, and you could ring them up, ask them questions, get their advice. Whilst it was very technical, it was still a good module, in my opinion, because you got that link to industry, you got that real environment, and there was a lot of authenticity to it. So there are some examples in academia, but I do think that they could be adopted more within other modules, and it could really, really help bridge that gap that we're seeing from industry.
Yeah, totally. And I think, as Dan said, we have been really fortunate with the place that we've gone to university. Sheffield has a very industry-driven mindset. So they do make extra effort to integrate these aspects into the curriculum. And also with our exposure to Seller and to Gary, who has really helped to develop those skills and is constantly pushing to have students have that in the back of their mind all the way through their degree. But really, we wanted to echo Gary's call to action that he made in the first talk in this series. And although our experiences have been extremely positive, hopefully it's also highlighted that there really is a place for more integrative projects, more extracurricular aspects that can then be brought into the curriculum that can really drive this skills development within engineering graduates. So just to round off really, how can we roll that out even beyond university? So pre-university, I think with the outreach work that I've done with students earlier on in their educational careers, there's definitely still a massive stereotype around engineering really, and it's this very technically driven, maths and physics based side of things that is really very black and white, like I said earlier on in the talk. And the events that I've always done have always tried to focus on the grey area that I spoke about earlier. So the creativity, the innovation, all the other soft skills that are really needed to make you a really good engineer. And when speaking to younger children and younger students, I still find a lot of them are really shocked when you say, well, it doesn't really matter that you're not very maths and physics based. I certainly wasn't all the way through school. I was very much stronger in art subjects rather than maths and science. But it's having that kind of passion like I did for aircraft and for space, and then harnessing it in creative ways, but also putting in that technical work and marrying the two together. And I think that's what makes you a really successful engineer, and it's getting that message across really to younger students. Then once in university, we focused on the experiences in academia that we've had. So the modules that we've had that have been really good and are kind of the seeds really that we need to start developing that holistic engineering skills environment within university. The extracurricular activities, like we've had Stella, and really industry-linked projects. So there's other things like Formula Students and Engineers Without Borders, other societies that are really popular around the country, and those can, again, kind of equip students with the opportunity to develop those skills. But we need more of them, and we need more scope for students to become involved in those at all different stages of their degree. Internships throughout university. So as I've said, that has really been fundamental in giving me the opportunity to put my skills into practice and to really deliver on projects that are far beyond the scope of what I'd studied at university. So I know at the moment, especially with COVID-19, students are finding it really tricky to get placements. Things are becoming increasingly competitive. So really supporting students through that experience. And as I said as well earlier, with virtual work experience, opening up those kind of platforms and offering more accessibility so that students who might have been not in a position to physically attend work experience in the past can now access that online. I think that's a really key point that's been emphasised even more through COVID-19. And again, in my experience, doing my dissertation supported by BAE Systems, I had fantastic mentorship all the way through that by Dr. Paul Needham, who's my supervisor from the company. And we put together a project on additive manufacturing applied to a real industry challenge. And having that experience of managing the academic pressures, also with the industry pressures, was something that was just absolutely invaluable and gave me a really relevant project that I was really passionate about and that I felt like would make a real difference in industry. So having more of those research opportunities and more partnerships between industry and academia will go a long way as well to addressing this skills gap. And finally, post-university, as I spoke about with my mentorship from Paul, there was also really great opportunities for reverse mentoring. And that's something really key. So having students that are so early on in their careers, working with people far more senior and far more experienced, there's a lot to learn from both sides, because actually my experience of university and my experience of engineering at this stage in my career is very, very different to Paul's in that example. And there's a lot of valuable opportunities there for kind of discussion and seeing things from different perspectives in that way. And obviously chartership is something that is just a fundamental aspect of documenting these soft skills. So that sort of framework and the different levels of chartership for all different areas of engineering are really great as well to support students in having that mindset, having that focus on developing evidence of skills and really keeping that in mind throughout their careers.
And with that, we'd like to welcome any questions. We'll be monitoring them and we'll ask them to the panel and we can answer as well. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it was informative and you got sort of a student's perspective that you might not have heard before. And thank you for listening.
Yep, thank you very much, Megan and Dan. I think that was actually really, really insightful. So as Dan said, this is the part where we open up the floor to include our panelists, Shannon and Hoda. So first things first, I think we should have a brief introduction from both. So I shall now pass you over to Shannon to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Shannon. I'm from the Mechanical Engineering Department at University of Sheffield as well. So I've been lecturing in the department for probably almost 10 years. And my background is more biomechanics. So sort of I'm not the traditional type of mechanical engineer, but it's a very interesting and forthcoming subject or field, particularly with the pandemic. I've been teaching a range of modules, both at undergrad and postgrad levels, and I've acted as year tutors at different levels as well. So that's me in a nutshell, and I'll pass it back to Jack.
Thanks, Shannon. If Hoda would like to introduce herself now.
Yep. Hello, everyone. So I'm Hoda. I am, you can't hear me, right? Because it doesn't, yeah, all right. And I am a senior research engineer and at the Manufacturing Technology Center, National Center for Additive Manufacturing. I have been at the MTC for about 4 years now, and before that, so I kind of like went up the ladder basically, and before that, I've worked at the Warwick Manufacturing Group at University of Warwick, and I did my master's and PhD at University of Sheffield. So I've kind of been like straight out of university into industry, which is an interesting journey to go through. I didn't do any sort of placements or internships. I did do a small one after my undergraduate, but not a lot more. So yeah, definitely interesting to hear Dan and Megan's perspective on the importance of those. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. We also have a surprise introduction from Richard Martin, so I shall pass you over to him now just to introduce himself as well.
Thanks, Jack. Yes, very quickly. So I'm here really to represent the employer. So I'm a director of a company called Arco Limited. We're a PPE manufacturing distributor based in the north of England. Mid-sized company, £400 million turnover. But I suppose my relevance here is that I'm also chairman of the Ron Deering University Technical College in Hull. The UTC movement, of which there are about 50 schools now, a free schools movement, where we've been championing this link between education and industry for many years now. And so the students at Ron Deering, their whole curriculum is designed by the local major businesses, which are like Siemens, Smith and Nephew, Reckitt, Spencer Engineering, Hull University, and what I've heard this morning is very much what goes on at the UTC as well, in that students spend much of their time working out in the businesses and doing project work with the businesses, and then as a result of that, they tend to get apprenticeships in those businesses. So about 60% of the students go on to apprenticeships, in comparison to about 6% nationally. So it's all designed. It's at an earlier stage, obviously, than the university movement, but a very similar concept where the students come out of the UTC either going to university or they are very much business ready and have done many of the things that I've heard this morning. And it's very much, but the whole UTC, excuse me, majors on engineering, mechatronics and digital. So So we're working really hard with local authorities to expand that movement and make sure that actually as an employer, we really struggle to get the skills that we need, and therefore having this link allows us to work harder with the schools to get the skills that we need and get those guys in either through to university, with more practical skills, or straight into business as apprentices. So it's really interesting to hear what's going on here, and I've had a few conversations with Gary Wood as well, which is why I've been asked to come along and listen to what you guys are doing.
Right, thank you very much for that. Right, we'll now go over to the questions, which I believe Megan and Dan will be asking. So thank you.
Thanks, Jack. So yeah, I suppose I just wanted to start off by asking the panel what you thought of the presentation, and do you think that there is a skills gap, and do you think that integrative projects are one way that can bridge that gap? And do you have any sort of ideas yourself on what you think could bridge that gap?
I'll start. So there is definitely a skills gap. I tend to find that that's probably it's starting to decrease within the new graduates that come to the company because of all the programs that are going on at the moment, like Stellar, like all the group projects that students are involved in. It just brings in those soft skills. So it's not so much of technical skills, because we're all we've been engineering students, so we obviously have some engineering background anyway, and you learn the technical skills on the job as you go on. It's more the soft skills, and also things like managing your time, understanding the risks, understanding how to manage the risks, things like that are so important. And you pointed out in your presentations, and you pointed out in your experiences throughout these projects, that you actually start to understand, and you're not just thrown into the deep as you start with an employer, and you have to learn these things on the job. And it's also so, because you have to know that once you are employed, it's just so much more pressure, because then you are responsible for what you are delivering. You're accountable. So and there's not, there will be some support. Obviously, we never just get someone who's right out of university to just like on a very high risk project. But still, it's, as a person, it's stressful to the person themselves. So it's really important to have those those environments where you actually mimic those that kind of pressure and that kind of projects, so students learn from those.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I definitely agree.
So if I could jump in for a couple of words, I think I echo a lot with what Hoda said, and I really enjoyed your talk. I think it's it's a new perspective that we don't usually talk about within the university from an academic point of view. And one thing that I really struggled, and I would like to get some sort of thinking from Hoda and from Richard, is that how do we tell students that it is important to have that experience? Because I think a lot of students coming to university with the mindset that I want to have good grades, I want to be academically excellent, but there's not too much thought about soft skills. And throughout the undergraduate degree, we actually have a few opportunities where students can develop those skills. So for example, we have the new first year integrative projects that's going to actually start in September, which is really exciting. We also have group projects in the third year, and a lot of them do have industrial mentors and an industrial initiative. So there's a lot of interactions with industry. We also have the new preparation for practice, which is designed for students to, if they want to develop soft skills, then they can. But I think sometimes when things go wrong in the project, when we try to discuss with students to look at the benefit about how they could actually meet the challenge and tackle those issues during group work, whether it's communications or sort of time management, or try to lead a group and make sure that things progress according to plan. Sometimes students struggle to see the benefit of those. And often you hear more of a negative thinking and sort of start pointing finger to say, my group is not working and I'm the victim. So I completely agree that they need all these soft skills and they need to somehow accumulate that during their degree. But I think I would like to hear some sort of comments from you guys, from the industry. How do we deliver the message to students that it's not just your grades? It's also very important for you to develop soft skills, communications, and try not to look at it at a negative point of view.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and that's another one of the questions actually we've been asked quite a lot. Is so the big question here was, how do you feel that your university course has helped you with achieving chartership or other industry qualifications? And what do you think universities could do to help make students and young professionals more aware of the opportunities like we've had within university? So that really ties in there to what you're kind of saying, Shannon. So I guess, Richard, what would you say is the key thing that you can do from a kind of industry and educator perspective to really engage students with those opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's all very valid. I mean, you know, we always recruit for attitude rather than skills. I mean, clearly, the education is important and the grades are important too, but you know, they're almost, they're just a hurdle you've got to get through. Once you get in front of an employer, what we're looking for is that attitude. We're looking for that kind of can-do attitude. We're looking for maturity, and therefore, and that's something in the past, even from my own experience when I was at Sheffield University many decades ago. We just nobody thought about that at all. It was all about just your qualifications. So I mean, but everything you're doing right now is exactly the right thing. And I see there's a question a bit later about what happens if you're not part of Seller or not part of one of these things. Well, I think we all have families, we all have friends in business and education, and there's nothing stopping people from, doing work experience over summer holidays, or even asking for mentors within local businesses. I think mentorship is absolutely superb. And actually from a business perspective, it's great as well, because it's really engaging for my senior teams to be asked to be mentors to people, and it's something that makes our kind of employee value proposition even stronger. So all these things are designed to make education and industry work better together. So I just encourage more of what you're doing. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, I think sort of to go back to the point of what can students do to sort of understand these skills, and how do they know that they're getting them, and how do they know they're important? I think that reflection is something that is massively underrated at university. I don't think reflection is pushed enough. And I think, almost like you said, Shannon, that sometimes students almost feel like a victim and they don't want to talk about the difficulties they've had within a group project. I think I've done that before. And I think that's because you see the 10% at the end of your grade that comes from writing a reflection piece. And you almost don't want to say anything wrong has happened. You want to reflect on good things so you get a good grade. And I think that needs to be radically changed within education. I think you need to be encouraged to say what went wrong. You need to be encouraged to discuss the issues and almost get marks for not having a perfect project, because that's not the reality. And I think that my friends, myself, you almost lie in your reflection and you say everything was hunky-dory, everything went smoothly, and I want my 10%. And I think that those reflections can also sometimes feel just tacked on to the end of an assessment. and they don't feel genuine. They don't feel like you're actually reflecting on anything. It's just a one-page thing you've got to do after you've submitted. And I think that a system of mentoring within a project, if you had an integrative project within a module, and you were able to have a mentor that would then be with your group and knew the problems you were having, and then instead of writing a reflective piece, you could sit down with that person and discuss the issues and discuss the skills you gained from those issues. I think that would be fantastic. I think that would just improve people's understanding, well, students' understanding of skills, how you develop the skills, and how you understand how you gain those skills, and how you reflect, because reflection is such a massive thing. And I think that's something that universities can do, in my opinion, to bring those skills up and really change that.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree, Dan. So another one of the questions that we've been asked is, once upon a time, some universities ran sandwich courses, which were 6 months in university and 6 months in industry for 4 years. So the question asker has said, I think this would resolve many of the issues you've discussed. Do you agree? So personally, first of all, I think that it kind of addresses this issue of having work experience, and I think that is great, and it should really be, I guess, kind of, from my experience, I would always have recommended that attitude of getting industry experience whilst you're studying. But I also think that there's a lot to be said for not handing students all of this, and actually still encouraging that proactivity and that kind of the drive to actually go and find these placements. And even though, as I said in the presentation, it is tricky and there are lots of pressures at the moment and it's very competitive, I think that this is an issue for students and for industry. So for students, you still need to be going out there and looking for these things, drawing and building on your network and promoting yourself in that way to try and get these positions. But then from industry, there needs to be a lot more done to improve the accessibility of these types of experiences and to support students there. So I wonder so you said that you didn't have any industry experience, or you only had a small internship going through university. So I'd be interested to know your view on this.
Yeah, so I wasn't particularly a very proactive student. I would say I wouldn't go in and look for opportunities just because, Shannon said, Dan said, and Martin said, at the time that I did my undergrad and master's, it wasn't encouraged that much to, go into industry and kind of understand what's going on. There wasn't a lot of understanding of what industry needed either. Nobody from industry actually came to us and presented, it's not really your grades that matter to us that much. It's more your kind of softer skills and you knowing how to deal with those difficult circumstances and that kind of thing that are actually really important. So one of the things I think in my mind, because Shannon said, how do you encourage students to go into these, these placements and getting more involved in projects and kind of reflecting on the outcome, is maybe there should be presentations to students from industry to actually say, this is what we need. This is what we're looking into. Of course, your technical skills are important. You are an engineer, after all. You need to have the technical knowledge. But these are also the things that need to happen. And then maybe within the group projects, things like, project management, there should maybe be a role like a project manager, and that actually kind of looks into, what's happening within the project, what's happening within the time and budget, and, reviewing the risks of the project. And then at the end of the project, reviewing the lessons learned within the project and kind of with all of the student team. And maybe there can be a mentor as well who can, and maybe someone outside of university, because as a student, you just, I felt like, I didn't maybe listen as much to my lecturers as I should have. It was more like if someone from the outside told me you should be doing this, I listened more to them. So I think getting more engaged and more involved with industry is probably the way to kind of take this forward for students.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, and that's something that we spoke about in that presentation, was students don't tend to listen, but if they've got something real that they can make, and they've got real people depending on them, they've got industry people depending on them, and they're enjoying it as well. Like as an engineering student, if you've got something, not even physical to build, but an actual output, and you've got little problems along the way, that's what gets engineers going. That's what gets engineering students going. And they have those little eureka moments and they're the exciting moments. And if you can instill those within the projects, I think students take the opportunity because they enjoy it, and because industry has said, this is what we need, this is what these are the skills you need. But if you can get the students to actually enjoy what they're doing and take ownership of the project, and sort of everything that me and Meg said within the presentation, that's what we felt, and that's why we enjoyed it so much. I think if you can somehow harness those within smaller modules and little pieces, I think that would be a major step forward as well as sort of letting them know this is what you need, actually getting them to learn those skills without them realizing, because they're just enjoying their time. But that's obviously easier said than done. I
think if there's some good news here, and that industry has a huge part to play here. And I think over the last sort of 15, 20 years, I think businesses have been reluctant to engage as they've been kind of inwardly looking at their own problems. I'm seeing a massive increase actually in roles such as community engagement manager, these sort of things in industry now, an investment in kind of community communication, all this kind of stuff. So, and I'm working with a group on Hull City Council, a group of businesses and education, to come together to try and work out how we can teach industries better about how to engage with educational needs. So I think, I do think there's some positive here in that you'll see more proactiveness from industry around. So that should be good news.
Definitely, I think so. Yeah. So moving on to another question then, I think this would be really interesting to get Shannon's perspective on. So one of the questions is, do you think the opinions of students are taken into account enough when designing the curriculum? So maybe from an educator perspective, Shannon, how do you think students' opinions are taken into account at the moment?
I think we're becoming more and more proactive at engaging with students. So I haven't been to other universities, so I'm just speaking from my own experience. I think when I first started my job, there wasn't that much initiative about engaging with students. But gradually, especially with the pandemic, we realized that actually it is very useful to have student opinion and perspective, which will help us shape our curriculum and also how we teach. Because a lot of time, traditionally, we're used to, you stand in front of a large lecture theatre and you get on with your job. But with the pandemic especially, suddenly you don't know what you're doing, in the sense that you're facing a screen most of the time and you don't get any reactions whatsoever. Maybe you get odd raising hand or chat box, but you hardly get any feedbacks from students about what you're doing. So I think I can see a very encouraging trend that increasingly within Sheffield, we are trying to involve the students more and more, both in designing our curriculum and also getting feedbacks about how we teach, what we teach, and in what format we teach that would best suit students. So we do these in a series of, we have those meetings with students' representatives. We also have opinion pools to get feedbacks from students. And we have those summer schemes where we pay the students to ask them to give us their experience about our course. So we give them a few modules to say, just go and browse, have a look at our website and let us know what you think and what we could improve upon. So I think these are really positive signs. And personally, I do wish to see more and more student involvements in sort of how we teach and how we design our modules. I think it's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. So I think, Jack, that's about time, isn't it now?
Yep, I'm afraid I think we've actually run out of time, which is a shame because there are so many more really interesting questions coming through. That's the problem with these webinars, is that you can only put a certain amount of time in, and if engagement is good, then you never have enough time to get as far as you want. So I just wanted to thank all of you for watching today. Thanks also to all of our panelists and to Megan and Dan for making this such a great webinar. You'll be able to find this webinar on the IMechE YouTube channel as well. This is the second webinar in the series, so we've got 2 more coming up in July and September, so look out for emails on that. And yeah, thank you very much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your week.